So our topic is, right, how to support families in being philosophical, which got me thinking a little bit about my own family, my family now, and the family I grew up in. And I think my family now, that consists of my little immediate family, right, strikes me as quite philosophical as families go, right? We think together about big questions and we check one another's reasoning and we kind of adapt our positions based on what other people say. And we entertain questions that have no settled answers. Um, and then when I think about the family that I grew up in, which I would have called philosophical in an earlier time in my life, I realized we were really more polemical in that we would sort of debate ideas in a kind of fight to the death for changing each other's views. Very much of the idea that the adults at the table knew what the right answer was, which I thought was philosophical, but it turned out I think really was just polemical, and not really very philosophical at all, right? And so part of me got to thinking about what's the difference between a family who just debates topics and a family who's being philosophical together, right? Who are wondering together, thinking about the big questions of life, doing critical thinking and good reasoning, but challenging one another's ideas, challenging your own ideas, right, based off of what other people say, rather than just trying to convince them of your own positions, right? Really thinking along with other people and driving the questions deeper, right? In the same way we do when we work with philosophy with young people everywhere, right? Rather than just yelling about opposing positions and trying to convince somebody else of your view. And then I also started thinking too about what makes a philosophical family. And I want to add to that that adults aren't the authority if there's a multi-generational household, right? That the young people in our lives are the epistemic agents of their own, right? And that they have ideas and thoughts and reasoning to contribute. I'm sure some people would disagree with that, but probably not at a Plato roundtable, I'm guessing. Um, but I started thinking about the difference between like in a where maybe adult centered family philosophical conversation is more like inflicting philosophy than thinking philosophically together, and like what's this difference between inflicting philosophy on other people versus actually being philosophical, right, as a group of people. So I throw that out there as something we could think about if folks want to. um and then I thought about all the ways to support families in being philosophical, right? Which to me means partially helping them to understand what's the difference between being philosophical versus just being polemical, right? Like, what is it we're doing when we have a philosophical conversation versus just a debate or some kind of an argument? And what are the kinds of things that come into question in a philosophical conversation that you wouldn't necessarily have come into question in other kinds of conversations, right? So we might have a disagreement over whether the table looks good, but we wouldn't, necessarily, if it's philosophical, we might ask if the table is actually there or not, right? Or does it matter if the table looks good? Or what does it mean for the table to look good, or not look good, which is a different kind of a conversation. And then the importance of modeling for adults what it means to take young people seriously as thinkers and knowers, right? That's another way to support families in being philosophical. Um, and then also modeling for adults to take on this position of co-inquirer instead of being the authority, right? And that's a thing that I see happening all the time out and about in the world. It happened as I was growing up. It happens all the time where you hear adults, a child will ask a very philosophical question, and an adult will attempt to just answer it definitively instead of thinking along or asking, why did you ask that question, right? What are you curious about? Or what do you think? Um, and that's a thing I think we can model and help people learn to do. And then giving them ideas of where to begin, right? Like materials for prompts, like the Plato Toolkit and the Children's Literature Library and all the other kinds of materials that are out there. How you might start a philosophical conversation, how you might end a philosophical conversation, right? Um, and then, I don't know, I thought about how we can do all of that, right? How do we support families in those ways? I think one great way is through the schools that they go to, if there's philosophy at those schools, right? To write up in the newsletters what's happening in philosophy and some questions that families can consider at home, or a good book to read all together, a little movie to watch all together. Um, Plato does intergenerational events, which I think are also a great way to support families in being philosophical, to give them a space to come together and do intergenerational philosophy with adults and young people, and then get a feel for how it works and right how we all talk to each other and think together. And also, I think too, like a reminder that philosophy is everywhere. Right, you don't need a lot of materials to do philosophy. You can just ask yourself if you know you have hands, right? And you can ask yourself if the table's here. And you can wonder what it means when we say, oh, that's a really beautiful tree, right? Or everyone's telling you at school that you should respect your teacher, but what does it even mean to respect someone? Right? Like philosophy is everywhere. It's so easy actually to pick up something and wonder about that. I think it's just maybe pointing it out to folks so that they can be attuned to those kinds of questions and see them when they come by. I thought I'd just maybe wrap up a little bit with some questions I think about, and then, either these will be interesting or not, and that's fine, and we can talk about, we don't have to talk about these questions, but one question I was thinking about is it important for a family to be philosophical? Right? Like, is that something we want families to be? And if so, why? Why not? Like, what also I was thinking about, what is valuable about doing philosophy in the home in particular, as opposed to at school or in a religious setting or wherever, right? Like, what is it about the home where why might we want to support people in doing philosophy in the home in particular, as opposed to other kinds of spaces? And then whether there are any potential dangers to encouraging, families to be philosophical. Is there anything potentially harmful about that? Or if not harmful, um, right, does it raise any issues we want to be attentive about or think about altogether and that kind of thing? So that's what I was thinking about in terms of supporting families and being philosophical, right? What it means to be philosophical at all versus just debating and being polemical. What kinds of attunements you need to have to think philosophically in a family group, how we might, as practitioners, support families in becoming more philosophical, and then also these other bigger picture questions about why should we worry about people having philosophical families at all, and is there any potential downside to doing it? So that's it for me. I'm really interested in hearing from you all and talking and thinking together. So